friends. Welcome to Sunrise Extra on a Tuesday. Thanks for clicking on us this morning. So we are talking about travel now that things are opening back up again. A lot of states, not Oregon, have lost all of the capacity limits and fully reopened. No more restrictions. We are still about 44,000 people away from the governor's mandated 70% vaccinated to do that. However, Travel Portland, the travel agency basically for the city, has put out full page ads kind of, touting us as being open and, we're a city, but you can go to the mountain, you can go to the coast, you can go, to wine country, all these wonderful things. And to try and kind of dispel maybe some of the reputation that we earned in the last year.
Literally a year,
with, a lot of protests and riots. Of course, COVID made that worse with boarded up windows and closed businesses and people kind of out of the city core and working from home. Also the homelessness problem that many cities have. It's not just us. Gun violence, blah, blah, blah. We are still a beautiful city. I still love living here. That's not going to change. We want to know from you, with all this kind of advertising for the city, which I think they should do. We need help monetarily.
Try to bring
stores
people
need
back.
help. And to get kind of us back on track. Would you tell people, if you had family on the East Coast or whatever out of state, come to Portland or avoid it still at this moment?
Right, can we show the poll? Yes, we can. There it is. So that's the question we asked. I mean, these are pretty drastic answers, I guess, because you could answer this question a number of different ways, but we gave you two choices. How would you describe Portland? A place to visit, or B, on the other side of the spectrum, a place to avoid. And 67% of our viewers, so clearly a solid 2/3, say they are still describing Portland right now as a place to avoid. This came up for me a couple of weeks ago. I think we talked about it on Sunrise Extra, where I had a friend call me who used to work in the city, has not worked in the city since the start of the pandemic. He's out in the suburbs, but he had family coming to town for, I want to say it was like a graduation. He said, hey, Drew, family's asking me if they should stay in downtown Portland. They're even considering the Nines, which is one of our nicer hotels in Portland. They wanted like that full Portland experience. He goes, what do you think I should say? Should I suggest they stay there? I said, well, where's like the family that they're visiting? Where do they live? He goes, well, they're in Milwaukee. I said, well, honestly then, if their main reason to be here is to visit this family in Milwaukee, I would probably say don't bother staying in the heart of downtown Portland right now. I can't say I recommend it. I would say if you want to see Portland, why don't you stay out there somewhere near Milwaukee? You could probably find a little hotel somewhere in Clackamas near the town center. And if you wanted to drive into Portland and check out the city because you've never been here before, go for it. But I can't say I would recommend staying there for a week.
It's interesting because the people who are responding to the poll are local. We just had people in from Seattle and from Los Angeles. And they are looking, and they met with realtors to buy property in the city of Portland. And one of them said, I was out, last night, it was about midnight, I was walking around downtown, quote, I didn't think it was that bad. She said Seattle was way worse. This is not a big deal. And she's betting with her money and buying property that Portland in the years to come is going to be a good investment. Property values here, though, the realtor they met with said if you can hold off a little bit, I don't think this is going to continue with people, offering tens of thousands of dollars over the asking price. At some point, that's going to level out. The other one up from LA said, oh my God, I'd have a totally little tiny house here, no problem, even at those exorbitant prices where you're, $650 for 1,300 square feet. She said in LA, it's astronomical. So they're selling property in really expensive areas and thinking that Portland is a great deal.
Now, do you think they're talking about the city proper? Like they're talking about the downtown core?
They are talking about the city proper, absolutely.
It's more navigable, of course, than LA.
Sure.
It's healthier kind of environmentally, smog-wise and all that kind of stuff. And, we don't have LA beaches, but we've got the Oregon coast, which is great, right, Rod?
Yeah.
It's all relative is my point, right? Depending on where you're coming from.
Yeah. And it's, a zip here and there. An hour you can get to a lot of really cool things.
And the ad agency,
Travel Portland,
because there is a Travel Oregon.
Yes,
this is specifically Travel Portland, the city of. So they'll probably still say you can go to the coast, and they're still doing that.
Well, they'll still sell those as reasons to check out Portland.
My point is, I'd rather work for Travel Oregon right now than Travel Portland if I had the chance.
Yeah. I am really glad. I think encourage them, do more,
Yeah.
because that is what's going to help bring us back, is the activation of these certain areas, particularly in the downtown core that we tend to focus on. You know, the more people that come to hotels and the more hotels that have, you know, bustling sidewalks and people parking their cars, that is going to deter, you know, petty crime and things, just by more eyeballs.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. And we talked earlier, and that did make me think, and I hope that's right. I mean, I can understand the logic in what
They
you're
have
saying.
security and,
Yeah.
you know, a lot of the private, or not private, but a lot of the big companies that have, you know, full floors of office buildings downtown, you know, those buildings have security, and that is just a good kind of deterrent to get more active people into the city. So I fully support it.
We're getting a mix of comments.
But we're getting a lot of them,
which
for
is
sure.
good. Becca says our city prioritizes progress over the people. This is a systemic problem.
Well, the question we put at the top of this broadcast, if you're watching on Facebook, the question, I'm sure it's the same question we put on YouTube, was point blank, how would you describe Portland right now? We gave you these two choices, but obviously when you chime in with your comments, you can expound on your answer. But right now, the two choices that we have in our poll, a place to visit or a place to avoid, and we're right around that 2/3 number in terms of people saying a place to avoid, the majority saying that. But people are weighing in. So real quickly, I'll just give two more, and I know, Brenda, you probably have a few in front of you. Lori Anderson says absolutely a place to avoid. I lost some of the ones that were near the top. Oh, okay. Veronica says, I prefer the quiet in my area where I live. I do come to the city for medical, but I prefer to live in my area, which, Veronica, we don't know where exactly your area is.
Shannon Thompson has one. She said, so I spent the early day in downtown Portland. I would not tell people to visit. It was so bad. It looked like LA Skid Row in the 80s. I saw people with suitcases, and the look on their faces was shocked.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we've all had, I know, Drew, you have, and I've had a similar experience. You know, Drew has friends and a family in a large city, Philadelphia.
Yes.
I have friends that live in St. Louis. I've had people visit this area from St. Louis. I know you have Philadelphia, and they both thought,
what's going
Portland's
on?
a small city, really, compared to both of those, especially Philadelphia. And they're like, what the heck?
Well, I'll never get that.
What is up with Tent City?
From well, this is from our wedding, which was 15 years ago now. So back in 2006, I don't think any of us were really talking about Portland as being a place to avoid, right? We all thought it was this glorious little gem on the West Coast that not a lot of people knew about. Great place to visit if you never have. My family came in for our wedding, again, all from the Philadelphia area. They grew up in the city, live in the city, and they're like, what the heck's going on here? And really their question was about the homeless. They had never seen so many homeless people just living, you know, out in the middle of the street, in the middle of the downtown core like that.
Because it hasn't happened.
Right. Well, in Philadelphia, I always say, you know, there are homeless people, obviously, in Philadelphia, but it seems to me like they are in the alleys. They're off the main beaten path. They're not out there front and center like they are here. For whatever reason.
Well, part of that started with the development of the Pearl. Like the industrial area used to be where a lot of homeless people would camp out. That's kind of out of your line of sight. But when everything started, they had to go somewhere. And so I think they became more visible. At least that's when I noticed it. You know, because I used to live over on the east side too. And occasionally on the Springwater corridor that goes around OMSI and back out, you know, I would see a few, maybe 7, 8 years ago. But now it's just everywhere. I mean, it's exploded to the point that it is shocking.
Yeah, Jim Harrison says future in-laws from North Carolina stayed in a hotel downtown. They got chased by a homeless person. Not a good experience.
Michelle Luberg says, please don't buy property here. Let Portlanders buy property here. Encourage Portlanders. I think a lot of Portlanders can't afford to live in the city. I mean, it's so expensive.
Well, there's just been that huge movement to go to the suburbs, you know, and COVID played a huge role in that. If people just want, you know, like, well, if we can't go to the gym or, you know, we're going to be hanging out in our backyard instead of a restaurant, like, let's have some space. And, you know, it's still affordable in suburbs.
Shannon Thompson has weighed in a few times already on the stream. I know you read one of her earlier comments, but here's just one more that I thought was interesting. She says, if you grew up outside of Portland, in the area, but outside of the city, like I did, she says, then you have always stayed away from Portland. And I'll tell you, my wife from Estacada, has always been sort of like uncomfortable. But to me, that's just a rural versus city thing. It's not specific to the city of Portland.
Sure.
But she's always felt like the traffic down here, the congestion down here, just people on top of people, I guess, compared to out in the suburbs or further out in the rural areas. But I think a lot of people, I would guess two things. One, we have more people watching us on the stream that live outside the city proper than in. I mean, because we cover a whole large area of the state. So there's a good chance that most of our viewers live outside the city. And I would also think that most of those people would be the ones who said, yeah, I avoid it. I don't need to go there, so I'm not.
Yeah.
You can tell me if I'm wrong.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I used to live downtown. I moved out of downtown for exactly this reason. Like back in 2016, I was like, I'm done. And I love urban living, but it just got to be so, I mean, it was the homeless problem. Our director said it was sketchy, and that is a good word. And I had Jaden, who at the time was 18, and I'm like, I don't feel comfortable walking down here, and I certainly don't want the 18-year-old out, in the evenings walking around. So we left, and I hate to say that, but I mean, I love this city. I do not like what it's become, and I don't know what the answer is. It is a complicated answer, but I don't see us making progress right at the moment. I mean, it's bigger than just get the people out of here. It's bigger than that. So I don't know.
It's hard.
It's a mess.
Are those two different problems, if you will? There's an effort that needs to happen, like Travel Portland is doing right now, to help the city. We're talking about businesses and people who live here, pay taxes and all that stuff, try to help the city. There's also an effort underway to help the homeless. Can you do both at the same time? Can you help the city and help the homeless? We have,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like,
God, I hope so. We voted in some very expensive measures to pay to help the homeless. So that's happening, I hope.
I mean, honestly, to me, I kind of chuckle in a bad way when I hear some of the city leaders talk about, we're looking at how to fix this. We're just not sure. We need to figure out how we can get people to come back downtown. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if you don't know how, then you're in the wrong job. It's a simple solution. You don't have people camping and living on downtown streets. And no one, don't misunderstand me, no one is a bigger advocate for spending dollars on building shelters and creating programs to help people get back on their feet. But the people that live here also pay taxes and have a right to a clean, pleasant experience when they're in downtown Portland. They just do.
It was funny. We went to, we go to Bend a lot, and we ran into a old retired firefighter. His daughter just graduated college, and she was like, "I'm moving up to Portland next month. I'm so excited." And I'm just like, "Oh, yeah." And she's like, "Yeah, the city life, blah, blah, blah." I'm like, "So it might be different than when you, saw it last," because she, it's been a while since she's been up here, but she just accepted a job, via a remote job interview. And so I'm like, well, things are starting, summer is helping, things are opening. And so just kind of talking to her and her parents about that. And then we have another friend who is a firefighter, and he's now working for Portland Fire, and he was with Bend, and he's he is from Bend, lived in Bend his whole life, and he's just like, I want, the city and like the opportunity to go to a Blazer game or like, big city stuff that you can't do rural. And so it's just really cool to kind of see it through people's eyes, just like you were saying, the LA, friends and Seattle people of like, no, you guys, this is, there are problems that we have in many other cities, but like, it's great. And then we're here living through this whole time, seeing it change in real time, and like, well, it could be better.
Well, I think it's even more difficult. I think, Brenda, you'll agree with me. This was one of the jewels in our entire country at one time. This was such a wonderful downtown area. Growing up in the Midwest, where cities just weren't alive in downtown. There were high rises that people came in to go to work and they left. This was a vibrant, wonderful city to spend an afternoon. And now I feel like that's working against my negative impression of the city now, because I remember how wonderful it was.
Right.
Yeah, and not too long ago. I mean, you're not talking about the 60s and 70s. This is this century.
And you're talking about the downtown core specifically. Because there are so many amazing neighborhoods. We were just over in Alberta on Sunday on Father's Day. And that place looked like It always had.
Okay.
Lots of people outside, sitting outside, waiting to go into, restaurants, taking the street side seating, and it was glorious. And I hadn't been out, for a while, and I was like, wow, this really does feel like old times.
And I would say for that part of the town, probably better than it had been not too long ago. I mean, that district has really been booming over the last 10 years versus, say, 20 years ago.
And I just want to read this one because this is from Michelle Loberg, and she said, do you hear yourselves? Push Portlanders out and move in rich folks? Incentivize. I love living downtown. We could easily make this better together. Okay, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think I heard any of us talk about pushing people out of Portland. The prices.
We've got to figure out the
and-
homeless situation. I say what I
Exactly,
think.
talking
but
about
we're not advocating
on
to
the
push people
sidewalk.
out. Exactly.
Yes.
If you heard that, I think you took it the wrong
and
way.
we do pride ourselves, our entire team, of reading as many comments from different viewpoints as we can. So here's one from Tim Dollar.
Okay.
Tim says, I live abroad and cannot stomach what has happened to Portland. And much of that rests on your reporting, talking about KGW and the media in general, I'm assuming. Peaceful protest, question mark. No support of law enforcement, question mark. You have made your bed and nobody will forget. Now you cringe from the seeds you've sown. Live with it. That's from Tim Dollar this morning.
I see that comment too, yeah. Howard Wright, who chimes in often on our show, says today, sometimes this segment is fun. Howard, what am I to take from that comment this morning?
Yeah.
Right before that Michelle comment that you read, Brenda, I saw one from Kathy Walker who says, I lived in suburbs near other cities and have been comfortable going into those cities, but not so much with the Portland of right now. And I thought Sheila's comment was interesting because she's lived here her whole life. She grew up in Gladstone, she says. She remembers when she was a teenager, she would always go downtown. In fact, every weekend. When she was in her 20s, she worked downtown, but she says, now I can't stand to go downtown anymore. And that, unfortunately, is a sentiment that way too many people have, and it's killing downtown businesses.
I think there is. Jennifer Taft was saying, we're always talking about downtown, blah, blah, blah. And it is, we think of Portland a lot as the tall buildings that you see in the tourism pictures, and right there on the waterfront. But it is, like you were saying, Alberta and some other neighborhoods. And yes, they absolutely have homeless tents, everywhere now. But I think, you can come to the city and be in the side neighborhoods and have a wonderful time.
That's the other thing that a lot of people have told me as they're talking, when everything, started happening back in 2020, the summer of, people who lived out of state, they called a lot of us, and they're like, oh my God, are you okay? And wherever you were in your neighborhood, you're like, that's like right here in downtown, and that's not happening in our neighborhoods and all the quadrants. Yeah. So I do think that reputation out there, it was really focused on downtown, but the image of all the fires and whatnot that got replayed and replayed and replayed and replayed, people who weren't here were really like, oh my God, the whole city. Right. From border to border is on fire, and that was not the case.
Jay Romero, this is an interesting point. I moved here a year and a half ago from LA. In comparison, Portland is affordable and fun if you're a millennial. I think the older generation are more uncomfortable with houseless people. I've had friends from LA move here after I did who agree.
It's
interesting.
Not, just to speak plainly, it's the darn stench. I don't want to visit any place where I smell urine. You can walk in downtown Portland and smell urine.
Yeah.
That's just not for me. And if that makes me an old fogey, then put me in the old fogey category.
That's not what makes you an old fogey.
There are many things that make me an old fogey. But to me, it's just the filth and what I mentioned.
Right.
It's unpleasant.
Real quickly, and maybe we wrap up with two things. One, this comment from Connie, and then two, the poll. But first, Connie, I think you gave us an idea for a future Sunrise Extra segment. I think it's a great idea.
All right.
Connie says, hey, let's have a morning where you guys talk about some of the great small towns in the area. Instead of kind of knocking Portland, let's talk about some of the great towns that lie outside the city. She says Silverton, for one, is a great example.
Love
That's where
Silverton.
she lives.
Yeah, I love it.
She calls it heaven.
Yeah,
Connie Staub Miller.
Disagree with her.
Yeah, Rod Hill
Silverton,
agrees with your
love it.
description of Silverton.
I love
heaven.
that Mount Angel Silverton part of the valley.
Great, yes.
It's just so charming and it's beautiful. And Silverton's got one of those spots they're on their little drag, you can spend all afternoon.
Yep.
There's enough little restaurants and coffee shops and fun stores to go in. Yeah, it's
Love
really
it.
nice.
And then on the outside of Silverton, of course, you've got Silver Falls State Park, which
Yeah,
is one of
which
the
is right
great
there.
attractions.
And the Oregon
in
Gardens
area.
down there.
Yeah, that's right. the
That
Oregon
is a
Garden.
good idea.
Yeah.
All right, so I wanted to show that comment because, yes, we may jump on that Connie Staub Miller and use that as a future Sunrise Extra topic, but maybe we can also close out with the poll, one last look, and encourage you to chime in on the poll if you haven't already. So the question we asked to start this whole conversation off, how would you describe Portland? This poll right now sits at the top of our @KGW Sunrise Twitter page. So far, 2/3 of our audience says they would describe Portland right now as a place to avoid versus a place to visit. If you don't use Twitter, I understand. So you can actually text us 503-226-5088 is our text line, and you can chime in that way. I promise you, your responses, your answers to these questions, always seen by many people within the KGW newsroom.
This is my mother.